So hello, first of all I want to say I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you in person. I've got a 30-year medical school reunion this weekend. I know you think I'm far too young looking to be 30 years since medical school, but it's true. So that's why I can't be here. So the motion is this House believes that Cochrane Groups should be free to use any methods they feel appropriate for their systematic reviews. So let me give you first some background to this debate. I believe and have stated publicly that the results from most Cochrane reviews are unreliable because the information on which they're based is untrustworthy. Now, it's untrustworthy for three main reasons. First, because of selection bias. The medical literature contains a biased selection of trials, and so systematic reviews that are based on it are also biased. Second, many trial reports provide inaccurate descriptions of what actually happened, and actually some of them are just complete fabrications. And it's important to know that neither the editors of the medical journals nor most Cochrane reviewers take any steps whatsoever to make sure that what authors said they did was actually done. Thirdly, random error. Most systematic reviews contain small numbers of small trials, and so there are really high risk of false positive and false negative results. Now, none of that is particularly controversial. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that the Cochrane Injuries Group actually did something about it. People love to describe problems. There's a small industry of methodologists who repeatedly describe the problems with the medical literature, but hardly anybody suggests solutions to overcome these problems. Now, what the Cochrane Injuries did is we carefully considered the options for reducing bias and random error. We crafted an evidence-based policy. We wrote it up. We made sure that it was properly peer-reviewed by sending it to an international medical journal. And then we published it, ensuring the widest openness and transparency. So, was our policy particularly controversial? Well, surely not. Conducting reviews within cohorts of prospectively registered trials as a strategy to reduce selection bias, that's not controversial. In fact, one of the primary motivations for trial registers in the first place was to reduce selection bias. Now, they're not going to reduce selection bias if we completely ignore them. So that was our first proposal. Our second proposal is that we would conduct statistical checks within systematic reviews, and if we have concerns, if we doubt any particular trials, then we'd write to the trialist and ask for the original data for further data checking. Now, we do lots of randomized controlled trials, large multi-center trials, and we routinely use statistical data checking in trials. It really doesn't make any sense to me why we wouldn't also do that in systematic reviews. And then the third thing we proposed is that we would ask reviewers at the time they write the protocol to specify the sample size for a systematic review. So how many participants would need to be included in their systematic review for the results to be reliable? Now, those are the three proposals, not particularly controversial at all. Did we spring this proposal on anybody without any warning? Well, not at all. We discussed it with David Tovey, we discussed it with Jos Verbeek. Both gave us a carte blanche to innovate in order to improve the methodological quality of our reviews. And this was further reiterated very forcibly by David at the coordinating editors meeting in Athens. He made it very clear that this was a fine thing to do. And then what happened? Well, then what happened is the sky fell on our heads. The kings and queens of Cochrane were outraged. We'd committed the cardinal sin. We'd acted unilaterally. So there was rapid responses in the BMJ. Cochrane Groups must implement new methods collectively. He made it very clear that there was to be no place for innovation and initiative within the new branded Cochrane. So here we are in Vienna, you're in Vienna, I'm in London, having a debate about whether Cochrane Reviews, whether Cochrane Groups should have the mandate to innovate, to choose the methods they think most appropriate for their reviews. So let's lay out the alternatives. So on the one hand, Cochrane editors, Cochrane Groups have the power or the authority to choose the methods they think is most appropriate for their particular area of work. Now this is the status quo. This is how it's always been within Cochrane. So editors can say, well, look, we're only going to include randomized controlled trials, or we're going to include randomized controlled trials and cohort studies. Some review groups include interrupted time series, different study designs, depending on the particular method, the particular topic area, and the quality and quantity of the evidence that's available. And they've always done that. So Cochrane editors have the authority to innovate in the interests of providing valid information. Now the new proposal seems to be this, that actually that power is being taken away, and that Cochrane review groups must act, they must march in lockstep in accordance with the most recent methodological mandate from Cochrane head office. So in this new proposal, consistency is king. So Cochrane reviews must be as consistent as cheeseburgers. Trusted ingredients, informed frying, better burgers. That's the new idea. But it's not going to be so easy, you see, because Cochrane reviews are not quite like cheeseburgers. So it's going to be a bit more challenging. And I don't believe that if we're going to this new regime of central methodological mandates, it's going to be particularly easy. Take, for example, what's the current Cochrane policy on fraud? Well, you can't tell me because there isn't one. Now, it's not that fraud isn't there. All you have to do is subscribe to Retraction Watch to know that there's a steady stream of fraudulent research flowing into the evidential sea. So the fraud is there, but the Cochrane collaboration doesn't have a policy on it. Now, the Cochrane Injuries Group in the last 8 years has had 2 really important reviews that were packed to the gunnels with fraudulent research. So we thought we were serving beef burgers and we were serving horse burgers. So, 2 important reviews, the results of which changed really critically when we discovered that they contained a large amount of fraudulent information. Now, in one of those cases, in one of those reviews, statistical checking by John Ioannidis and his group had actually flagged up some of these trials as being fabricated or fraudulent or certainly doubtful. And they'd contacted the authors, but they were being kind of, reassured that everything was okay. Well, we can't ignore fraud. In fact, the Cochrane collaboration, it's not the case that it has not got a policy on fraud. You cannot not have a policy on fraud, because what it really means is that you're ignoring it. in that you're indifferent to fraud. Now, we don't think, after these two disasters, we don't think we can remain indifferent to fraud anymore. So we've got a policy of this statistical checking. Now, we've been asked to hold back our policy for another year while Cochrane methodologists come up with some suggestions, but you can't do that. You can't ignore, we can't keep on ignoring fraud. Now, of course, any methods need to be evidence-based whenever they can be. So we're not proposing, of course, you must take into account the most recent methodological evidence when you're drafting methods policies. But at the same time, there are some situations where evidence can't actually choose between different methods. For example, you can say, well, look, you can compare point estimates from where you have from reviews based within a cohort of prospectively registered trials with point estimates from reviews based on all the trials they could find, and they will be different. You know, it's inevitable, there'll be some differences. But you can't say which one is closer to the truth because you don't know what the truth is. So you have to resort to theory. You have to resort to what sounds more reasonable. So another situation would be, randomized controlled trials versus cohort studies. You can look at the two results from the two and you can say, well, which one is best? Well, you choose the results from randomized controlled trials because it makes theoretical more sense. So while I accept there are some situations where evidence, empirical evidence is useful, in some situations you've got to resort to reason based on theory and a methodological theory. So where do we go from here? Well, if we do go boldly forward into this brave new world of centralized methodological mandates, then I hope certain things are true. I hope, for example, that those making these decisions are really wise because they're going to have a very wide breadth of vision to foresee all of the methodological issues in all of these different subject areas. They're going to need a lot of time as well because keeping up with the methodological literature across all areas is not going to be easy. Now, individual review groups can do that for their particular area, and so they can make, sensible decisions for a particular topic area. But if this is going to be central mandates, it's going to be much more difficult because there's a much greater breadth. And so we have to hope that the Cochrane collaboration won't sink into a sort of bureaucratic mire of, we haven't got a policy on that and we've got some group looking at it and 2 years later they'll come up with some solution. And we have to remember that this debate today, we're trying to decide how we should decide on things. So if an organisation has to have debates to decide on how it should decide on things, we can't be that optimistic that it will actually come, will be rapidly decisive with these methodological recipes. But I hope it won't come to that. I hope the organisation will come to its senses and see that diversity is actually a strength. The fact that we've got, 50 plus review groups innovating in their own particular area, that's a strength that we want to, that diversity and innovation is one of our major strengths, and we shouldn't be pulling back from that towards, this sort of, pulling back all of the power centrally. It's ironic, really, that companies spend millions on management consultants to get advice about how they can get particular people to how they can make their organisation more innovative and more creative, when the Cochrane collaboration seems to be going in the opposite direction. We want it to be less creative, more centralised. So I think this is a mistake. I think we will come to our senses. I think we should let 100 flowers bloom, and that the Cochrane collaboration should be more of a bouquet than a burger. Thank you very much.